The Okavango Delta is in northern Botswana. It's one of the most amazing places in the world. This is what it sounds like in the morning when the birds are calling, and it's quiet. This is different than at night, because at night you hear a lot of lions and baboons and hippos and stuff like that. It's a lot louder, but it's home to one of the largest populations of African elephants in the world, and it's by far one of the most incredible places I've ever visited. And it's a protected place. Botswana does a very good job at protecting these environments. But just like most protected places, it's under threat. There's human activity that can impact it.
When he isn't traveling through the beaches of Palau or the wetlands of Botswana as part of his conservation work with the National Geographic Society, Shah is busy at Boeing, where he's a level 3 engineer and technologist working on spacecraft liquid propulsion subsystems. So he is a real-life rocket scientist who's going to save the world at the same time.
As mentioned, I'm Shah Selbe, and I'm going to kind of take you along on this journey of adventure and technology and the kind of works that we do to help protect the planet. So, as was said, I'm an explorer with the National Geographic Society, and I'm a conservation technologist. So what that really means, what a conservation technologist is I'm an engineer by training, and I look to bring innovative technologies from fields all over the world, different industries, into better protecting our planet. So, and that means a lot of things. But to kind of explain what that means, I'll tell you a little bit about how we protect places, right? So, there's a lot of work that goes into protecting a place, setting up a reserve somewhere. We work with the communities very closely to understand like the cultural value of these places that they live and they work at. Then we go out and we explore them from a scientific standpoint and understand why we're looking to protect these places. You know, we assess the importance of the wildlife populations and the ecosystems there. And then from that, like protected areas or reserves are established. The boundaries that are picked for a variety of reasons, right? When everybody comes to the table and they talk through why we need to protect a certain area, we kind of get an agreement there, and then the laws are written, and that place becomes a reserve or a marine protected area. So, but the next critical step, and often the hardest step, is what happens next, right? So, we have to make sure that these are actually protected places, that they're not paper parks, and we call them paper parks because paper parks means that it's just a park on paper alone. It's not actually really a reserve. So the really hard part is how do we do that? How do we support these people? The conservationists, the rangers, the enforcement officials that are out there doing this work to try and keep this area pristine. So it's very difficult. There's never enough resources. You're never going to find a ranger that says, yeah, I got a ton of money to do my job. Like every single one of them tells you they don't have enough to do what they need to do. And this is something that I've encountered in my work all over the world, everywhere I've gone, time and time again. So to kind of give you an idea of that scope, I'll talk a little bit about some of the early work I did in Palau. So Palau is an incredible set of islands in the South Pacific. It's beautiful. The president there, actually the last 2 presidents have been very environmentally forward-thinking, and they established a fishing reserve, where you can't do any fishing. First it was a shark sanctuary, and then evolved into no commercial fishing in their entire waters, all the waters that belong to Palau. So that's what's called an EEZ, or Exclusive Economic Zone. Now, to protect that area of 600,000 kilometers, guess how many fishing vessels they had to do that? Or how many patrol vessels they had to do that? They had a single patrol vessel to protect the area the size, just under the size of Texas. So how do you do that? That's something that's not feasible. So how can we help these people at the front lines kind of get better at their jobs and do a better job at protecting these kind of pristine environments and these critical species? Well, my background is engineering. I went to school for engineering, and so I think about technology. And I think technology is a great way to allow us to kind of do that work. So over the last couple years, that's really what my focus has been on, and I've worked with organizations like the New England Aquarium or National Geographic to really think through what that means. So I map out these technological innovations that are happening all over the world and try and find them, conservation problems that they can solve, and to protect some of the most pristine places this planet has to offer. To demonstrate that, I'll talk through one of my projects. And this one happens in sub-Saharan Africa. It's called the Okavango Wilderness Project. So the Okavango Delta is in northern Botswana. It's one of the most amazing places in the world. This is what it sounds like in the morning when the birds are calling, and it's quiet. This is different than at night, because at night you hear a lot of lions and baboons and hippos and stuff like that. It's a lot louder, but it's home to one of the largest populations of African elephants in the world, and it's by far one of the most incredible places I've ever visited. And it's a protected place. Botswana does a very good job at protecting these environments. But just like most protected places, it's under threat. There's human activity that can impact it. So I have a short video to kind of help you understand what that threat is.
The Kalahari is the birthplace of our human existence. It's the sanctuary of the sand bushmen who were to 100,000 years ago populate our planet and result in all of us. And when you come out here, you get to be part of the cycle of life, the cycle of death.
The Okavango Delta is our mother of the Bayei tribe. We depend in the Okavango Delta. All the food we have, we get it from the Delta.
The source of the Okavango River is on the Bay Plateau in the Angolan highlands. This river then flows 1,000 miles down through Namibia into northern Botswana, where it finds itself in a delta in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. "27 years of war ended in 2002. The development in Angola since then has been rampant. We're looking at the potential for dams, for agricultural developments, for pumping schemes. All of these things are going to change the flood dynamic in this sensitive wetland ecosystem.
If the water disappeared, our tribe, they won't survive anymore. Animals as well, they won't survive because they're water dependent.
The urgency is now. We are taking dugout canoes or mekoro with our team down the length of the Okavango River.
The idea of it seems like madness. Never forget where you are.
You have to make sure that you keep your eyes open so that you know where they are, or you listen very well to hear.
Big one in front. Coming around, coming around.
We've been living out here, used to sounds of hippos, like you can hear them behind me right now. Used to sounds of elephants in the distance, trumpeting about their who knows what, and we've been part of it in an incredible way. This place is really special. I want to work to make this place stay the way it is, to help this place any way I can.
We can bring that place back. We can turn it again into the elephant factory for Africa. In the famous dictum of Henry David Thoreau, in wildness is the preservation of humankind. It is the very pulse of this planet. And when we lose these last wilderness areas like the Okavango Delta, we lose the beating heart of our planet.
That's the Okavango Wilderness Project. That guy that you heard talking through most of it, he's the lead biologist. His name's Steve Boys. He's another explorer, and he's a conservation biologist. So, and part of what we do is a traditional wildlife census. We get in those makoros, like you see, which are dugout canoes here, and we go from the top of the delta to the bottom, and we count the animals we see. That's nothing different than a lot of biologists and other kind of explorers and scientists do on expeditions. But as you could kind of maybe tell from the video, it's a very adventurous expedition. It's very difficult. The places we go to and the things we see, we go to parts of the Delta where no one else is really allowed to go. And as a result, we're surrounded by things like lions and crocodiles and hippos and giraffes and elephants and all these amazing animals. And I've been charged by basically most of those things. But none of them really scares me the way that these things do. So, some of you guys might think hippos are cute, but they're very frightening, actually. Like, they kill more people in Africa than everything else combined. They're very territorial. And when a hippo charges you and you're in the water and you're in a boat, they basically drop down onto the ground underwater and then run at you. So you see an angry hippo and then you just see this wave coming towards you. And it's definitely one of the most frightening things that I've ever done. And the worst part is they have this like maniacal sound when they're angry at you that sounds like an old man laughing at you. It's like something kind of like this. See, isn't that weird? Yeah. But when they're really, really angry at you, so this is like the angriest they get, they do this thing that I have here, which is they go up on the bank and they start spinning their tail around and start to defecate and do what I like to call the poop tornado. And so I was lucky enough to get a picture of this and what he's producing behind him. And it's supposed to be kind of this threatening display of intimidation. It is very much so. But as a conservation technologist, my role in the project is really to measure this water quality that we heard about, right? We're concerned about the impacts that development upstream of the Delta could be having there. So it's this water quality. It's what I like to call measuring the heartbeat of the Delta. And so it's really everything that air environment relies on. And we have to protect it, right? It's one of the most pristine places that has a lot of these big charismatic megafauna that so many of us know from sub-Saharan Africa. So how do we do that? Well, we could do that through conservation technology. So we can turn to technology to try and help this situation. And I'm going to go into a little bit why it's so urgent that we need to turn to technology to do that. So we currently find ourselves in the middle of what's considered the sixth mass extinction. So extinction rates are about 1,000 times higher than what we would consider baseline or normal, right? Now we've had extinction events before in the past, but this is the first time that it's actually been caused by a single species, and that species are humans. So, and mostly the tools that we use to protect this planet, they're old and ineffective, right? But we don't have to do this anymore. We're kind of at this cusp of these tools changing quickly, and we need to harness them. Overfishing and illegal fishing is this massive problem in our oceans, right? It's the illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing industry is a $23 billion a year industry. The illegal wildlife trade is the fourth most lucrative illegal activity after human trafficking, drug trafficking, and weapons trafficking. So it's a massive problem. We lose over 1,000 rhinos every year, and these are small populations. There's something like 35 Javan rhinos left, all for a horn that's made out of the same thing that our fingernails are made out of. And as many as 50,000 elephants are poached each year for their tusks. And so this is as big of a problem that in our lifetimes, our children could never know an elephant in the wild. So we're in the midst of this environmental decline in many ways, all over the world. But at the same time, we're living in the middle of kind of an amazing technological innovation period, right? I mean, if you look at the photo on the left, the time between the photo on the left and the photo on the right, it's not that much time, right? People used to spend a fortune to buy everything you see right there, right? They'd spend all this kind of money to buy all these different devices and these units to put in their homes to have the same capabilities as this little machine that we all carry around in our pockets, right? So it's this pretty amazing time right now for us to be able to do this a lot more capabilities. And smartphone technology is really driven like sensors and processors and batteries to become really small so we can do like very interesting things. So that little sensor I'm spinning around is measuring acceleration in different ways. And so you can imagine if you stick that to an animal, you can gain some really interesting insight from the data that comes out of that. And some of my efforts in bringing the sensor technology to conservation looks at the Internet of Things. So these are things like the smart home or the connected city that people have heard about, to really move beyond having connected toasters and thermostats to having connected ecosystems. And that's the work that we're doing in Botswana. That's basically what it's all about. So we build these open source solar powered water quality sensors that can measure and in real time send us back any kind of data that we need to know from a scientific standpoint, but also risks as they come through. So these little sensor networks act as kind of protectors of the environment, right? They measure changes in certain parameters and how these changes are correlated to each other to tell us if something like illegal mining is happening upstream, or if a poacher enters an area where a poacher is not supposed to go. So we've deployed these sensor networks through 4 different locations all through the Delta, and we've also kind of carried along with us on the expedition. So I said before that part of the Okavango Wilderness Project is this wildlife census, but our wildlife census is very different than what a traditional census would be. We consider it a live data expedition. So in the past, when scientists went on these big expeditions, they'd gather all this data, and they'd come back, and it'd take them years to dig through all of it, and then they would publish it in some journal, and maybe eventually it gets in a magazine and people start hearing about it. So our whole idea was, we're going to do this differently. We're going to share this real time with the world. So I built all the hardware that allows us to do that, pull the data and share it real time with the world. Sensor readings, biometrics from the scientists that are out there, habitat shots, all of that stuff. And all the data is fully open, and it's available through the API on our website, so you could just pull it and do whatever you want with it. So we didn't want to gain the accolades from the journal articles that we're reading, that we're writing and people read, but we wanted the accolades to come from all the amazing things that people do. You know, artists, educators, anyone out there that wants to take the nearly 5 million data points that we've collected to today and do some interesting stuff with it. But beyond that, we wanted to share that experience with the world. And so we embraced social media in kind of a big way. We used things like Twitter and Instagram and SoundCloud and Snapchat. And the response we had from people were amazing. And so to kind of illustrate that, I'll tell one story. So last year's expedition was very long. It was four months long. Started at the source of the catchment in Angola, went through Namibia and into Botswana. And so there was one part of the expedition in Angola that was very, very difficult. It was, the water was moving fast, the river was very narrow, it was very windy, everything was capsizing, it was cold and wet, and, it was much harder than everyone was expecting. So everyone was really kind of bummed out, and spirits were low. And we communicated these hardships to the world via Twitter, right? Because that was the whole point, right? Is to share everything with the world. And one of our followers on Twitter saw that, and she sent us this tweet. So that person was Samantha Cristoforetti. She was an astronaut on the International Space Station. She tweeted us this message of support along with this picture of the Delta she took just for us, and it was incredible. I mean, all our spirits were raised as a result of that. It's the only time I've ever gotten a tweet from somebody not on this planet. So it's a pretty neat thing. And so what we're doing now is we're taking all these tools and everything we've learned over the last couple of years and this hardware, and we're turning it into something that anybody can use, right? We're creating all the designs, all the hardware, and we're turning it into basically a nonprofit that we will spread this out for any kind of scientist, conservationist, explorer, citizen scientist, educator, anybody all over the world who wants to do the same thing that we did in the Okavango. And, over the next couple of months, I'll be taking some of these sensors up to track changes to a glacier in Alberta. We're going to take it to study a sacred boiling river in Peru. And then we're going to take it along some of the pristine reefs of Belize. So there's a lot of really interesting work that's coming out of it, and we're going to share it all real time as we do it. So, but beyond these sensor technologies, I also have done a lot of other technology work. So one of them is work I've done with drones. I started a project called Soar Ocean, which was funded by National Geographic and Lindblad Expeditions. And really the whole idea of it was, how can we use these low-cost drones that everybody is getting for Christmas and flying into trees and stuff, but how can we use them for coastal conservation, gather more information about our coasts and understand what's happening out there? Monitoring, protection, science, stuff like that. So over the last couple of years, we've done a number of surveys off the coast of California and other parts of the world in Botswana. We've used them to kind of try and find illegal fishing vessels. We've used them to try and find ghost nets. So those are nets that they've kind of like escaped the fisher and they've gone off and they just drift through the water catching things. We've used them to help stop or help assess whale entanglement. So when whales get entangled with fishing gear, how do we kind of assess that and help the whale? And then to do surveys of marine mammals or coastal erosion. So drones are a really amazing tool, and they're only going to become more capable and cheaper as we move forward. And sometimes we catch them from boats like that. But the drones that I work with aren't always just attached to the skies, right? There's these really like amazing low-cost underwater drones that are now available. This is OpenROV, which was this really amazing open source ROV, remotely operated vehicle project that a few friends of mine have developed. And they've given them to schools and people all over the world to go do some really amazing underwater exploration, finding shipping, old vessels that sunk off the coast of places, or even doing marine biology type work. But I try to make use of phones to gather data. Phones have become this thing that everybody has, right? You can go anywhere in the world and buy a SIM card. It's very easy. By 2017, I think over a third of the world's population will have smartphones, not even feature phones like the Nokia, they're actual smartphones. So you can imagine there's a lot of really amazing stuff you can do when that many people have access to this incredible tool that I talked about earlier. And the prices keep on dropping. It keeps on becoming cheaper. So that Nokia you see right there in the middle, I remember I saved a couple paychecks to buy that thing, 16 years ago or whenever it first came out, because I wanted a cell phone, right? Just a few months ago I was in Namibia and I bought one for, I think it was just under $5 to buy one. So, these prices are nothing. And so you could do some interesting stuff with it. Like one of my projects is MPA Guardian. And so the idea is, you may have heard of citizen science. Well, this is citizen protection. Like, how can you create an app and a website that allows people to document things that they see that are happening that are environmentally damaging along the coast and anonymously report it? And that kind of information can get sent to the people who need to know those sorts of things and change what's happening there. And another project that I'm working on right now to take phones even further, that's Topher White. He's a friend of mine, and he created this really amazing thing called Rainforest Connection. So I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but basically it takes donated smartphones and it puts them up in the rainforest canopy to listen for chainsaws and motorcycles to try and stop illegal logging in the rainforest. And so what Topher and I are starting to do right now is we're taking his same technology and we're bringing it to the oceans. So we're going to put them in marine protected areas and listen for vessel traffic in sensitive areas where vessel traffic's not supposed to go. So there's lots of exciting work to come down the line. And a lot of the work that I do also looks at satellite data. There's a lot of interesting information you can get from satellite data. This company, Planet Labs, that I have up here behind me, are friends of ours, and they're in San Francisco, and they take CubeSats, which are these really small satellites that you see. It's not like the satellite that you think of when you think of satellite, a really big thing. It's these small units, and they basically turn them into imaging satellites, right? So right now they have 35 of them orbiting. By the end of the year, they'll have 100. And their whole plan is to take one picture of the Earth, like the entire Earth, every single day. So you can imagine there's some amazing conservation implications that come out of having that kind of data. You could see how forests are changing. You can see how coastlines are changing. You could see human activity and how it's really impacting the environment. And beyond technological conservation, we're thinking about other innovations within conservation. So I work with this group called Conservation X Labs, and we're thinking through, how do we change some of the incentives and mechanisms around conservation? Like, what would it look like if you had a Kickstarter for conservation? Or how do you bring in skill sharing in a broader level across the board? So engineers like me can help projects that they weren't connected with before. And part of that is actually, we've identified these 10 grand challenges in conservation that we want to work through, and we're working with WWF to try and figure out how to kind of source some of those innovations that move forward. One of those innovations is this Blue Economy Challenge that we're doing with the Australian government, and this is really looking at aquaculture and how do you promote aquaculture in the Indian Ocean. So they're giving away, the Australian government is, we're not giving away, but Australian government is giving away $250,000 to $750,000 to ideas that look at doing that kind of stuff. And I work also with the Fish Hackathon. So I don't know if you guys have heard of the Fish Hackathon, but I'm one of the judges this year for it. And it's basically started by the State Department. And the whole point is, how do you bring coding and software and all that kind of stuff into some of the problems that our ocean faces? So there's some interesting projects that have evolved out of that, and they're having it all over the country. So if you know coding and you want to get involved, you can go to the Fish Hackathon website and figure out how to do that. So, as you said earlier, I'm a firm believer in the fact that there's more problems out there than there are people who are willing to solve them, right? And those solutions don't always come from the people who are actually in those industries, right? I was an engineer, and I started looking at conservation, and I found some opportunity in that. So you don't have to be a biologist or a lawyer or an engineer to do just that, right? Conservation needs people with a broad variety of skill sets to help us with some of the things that we're trying to do. And so these are skills that many of you guys out there might actually have, and that you can do if that's something that you're interested in. So I guess my call to action is if you're out there and you want to get involved, just get involved. People might say, no, we don't need you for a long time like they did for me, but eventually one day they'll include you into the room, and then you can do some really cool stuff like get chased by hippos. So, all right, thank you very much.
The water quality issue you were looking at, what are the main ones you're looking at? Just like hydrocarbons, oils? What?
Yeah, we have just an array of water quality sensors, but the things that we're really concerned about is any kind of mining activity that could impact the water, or hydroelectric and things like that. So beyond water quality, we also look at flood dynamics, water level and flow rates and things like that, and we track them through different parts of the delta over time to see how they change. So the delta is, it starts in Angola at the catchment, and it flows through into the middle of the Kalahari Desert, and it's a completely inland delta. And so those floods are really important to not only the animals, but the communities out there. The main tourist town, Maun, which is in the southern part of the delta, they talk about floods more than any other community I've ever known of. That's all they think about is the floods, because it's so important to everything that they do. So any changes to that could be catastrophic, right? So that's what we're trying to monitor.
So what do people in Africa actually think about conservation? I'm sure they're poor, they've got other things on their minds about how to survive, and this may be just something that they think of as tourists?
Yeah, but the tourist thing is huge, right? So Botswana has a massive tourist industry, and...
Sorry, Shah, could you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. So he said, what do the people out in Africa think about this project, and do they think of it just tourist? That was about it, right? So the tourist thing is actually big, and this is what we've seen in working with the Angolans. So all the projects that I work on, I work with the communities out there, like specifically. I'm not developing technologies to run programs in other places. I'm developing technologies and teaching the people on the ground like how to use them. So we work with the universities in the area, we work with scientists in the area, and actually we've gotten a lot of positive traction in Angola because they see the tourism industry in Botswana and how helpful it's been for a lot of the Botswanan people out there. And so the Angolans now really want to have that similar kind of tourist environment in the southern part of Angola as they start to remove some of these landmines that were left from the Civil War, and it becomes an area that is actually connected to the Delta. It can become more of this cross-national tourist kind of thing. People go on big safaris through the whole thing. So that's actually been a pretty positive thing. Every place that I've worked, the people who I've worked with in communities I've been helping, they're more than happy to have these kinds of solutions, right? Because a lot of them, especially the rangers and the people in the field that are supposed to be protecting these places, they're frustrated, right? They don't have what they need to do what they're supposed to do. And so if you give them some tools that can help them do that a little bit better, they get pretty excited about it. The question is, what do you do when the hippo charges you? You paddle as fast as you can. Yeah, it's pretty scary. We had last year's expedition. We actually had a hippo put its two tusks through the bottom of one of the makoros and throw the makoro over, and it was a pretty scary thing. But the interesting thing was, since we're gathering all this data, we saw it happen in the data. So we saw, the heartbeats of everybody go up real fast, and everything, all the data get weird, and so we're like, okay, that's something. And so at that time, I wasn't on the expedition there, but I was in northern Botswana, and we saw this data come through, and we're trying to figure out everything. And Steve, the guy you heard talking in the video, we were looking at all the data come through, and something like 2 hours later, his heartbeat starts going, up again, really, really aggressively. And so we thought something else was happening, right? And so we called Steve on the sat phone, and we asked him, like, what happened? Why'd your heartbeat go up that fast? It turns out he called home, and he was talking to his wife and his son, and relived the experience. And we saw that all through the data. So the question was, I moved from engineering into conservation. Is that like a pipeline that was readily available? So the answer to that is, when I did it, no, it wasn't. So I had people in the conservation community, like Megan Jeans here, that like believed in the work that I was doing and kind of supported that. And so, but I had a lot of people who thought the stuff that I was doing was maybe wasting time or not super helpful. And it was years and years and years and years and years of working on it, for people to start to change. And so the idea of a conservation technologist didn't exist when I started this. 2 months ago, WWF put out a job requisition for conservation technologists. So things are changing. So the question is, how do you handle data management and curate it, know what to look for? And so we work with brilliant data scientists. So the Okavango Wilderness Project, there's basically 3 project leads. Steve Boys, who you heard talking a lot in that video, does all the biology stuff. I do all the technology stuff. And the third is this individual named Jer Thorpe, who is a data scientist, data artist. And so he does a lot of very interesting things with data visualization. How do you bring in big data and like make it into something that's understandable? And he has really helped us think through that whole thing. So it's an issue that we deal with a lot when we're working with scientific and conservation organizations. There's actually a term that we use because so when people are out in the field and they're gathering all this data, they're putting it on random forms or putting it in Excel. Nothing's compatible and nothing talks to each other. And a lot of organizations that you work with that, they don't want to show you their data because it's so messy, and we call it data embarrassment. Like, how do you get over the data embarrassment to put it into something that works, like a system that works, and that it's actually something that other systems can talk to, so we can start to pull like this interesting insight out of it. So we think a lot about that. That's like a big part of it, especially as you start putting sensors on everything and smartphones and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So the question is there a risk that poachers or bad actors will get a hold of some of that data that we're posting? So if there's data that's deemed to be kind of sensitive, we'll be careful about that. We're not going to tweet out elephant locations and stuff like that, right? But there's ways you can kind of handle it and process it at a later date, or maybe give it some time before you end up posting it. And so we think through a lot of those mechanisms. Yeah.
Right. I just wanted to thank you again, Shah, for being here tonight, this evening.
I went to his hotel room and got on the internet and downloaded a video of some silly MTV disc jockey shooting himself out of a cannon. And he said, "What network is this?" And I said, "It's the internet." And he says, "Who owns it?" And I said, "No one." He says, "You mean Murdoch?" And I said, "No, no, no." And he said, "Can I?" And I said, "Can I?" He said, "Can I own it?" And I said, "No, no, you just don't understand the internet."